All right, so I'm putting on some gloves because with your fabric, if it sits for 24 hours or more, then the dye in the fabric goes through a process of exhaustion. That means that the dye no longer dyes the fabric, but it hasn't been 24 hours fully. It's been a little bit less than that. And some of the dyes actually take longer to get exhausted, so it can stain your hands. So I avoid that by putting some gloves on. You could also put like grocery bags on your hands. If we would wait any longer than this, then the glue lines that were put in, the soda ash eats away at those glue lines. You can see on my fabric that I still have my glue lines and I still have my wax. So the wax needs to come out. The glue needs to be washed out. So what I start with is some warm water. And you can just start rinsing your fabric as you're trying to get the water warmer. Just getting that water in there and squeezing it. It's not going to run clear until you add soap and then rinse it again. The warm water opens up those fibers and gets rid of what's called migrant dye. Migrant dye is any molecule of dye that has not adhered to your fabric. If you have wax and you squeeze it, your wax is going to break, and that's okay. So now I'm just going to add a little bit of soap. This is Dawn dish soap that I'm using. Thank you very much. It's a really nice soap to use. It has what's called a surfactant in it, which also helps to get rid of that migrant dye. So I am going to just lather this up, get it nice and soapy. And I'm working that soap into my fabric. This is going to help you get your glue off as well. So those of you who have glue, you're really going to want to rub the glue out of your fabric. You might also have to pick some of that glue off as well. Although it's washable, so it should come off, it just might not come off easily. Now we're going to rinse it. And I am rinsing it with warm water that is helping to get rid of the soap, the migrant dye. It's keeping those fibers open. It helps to break down that glue. I'm rubbing those areas of glue with my hands. Once you have all of the dye out of your fabric, you can take your gloves off. So I'm going to take my gloves off because they're sliding off anyways. Because your next step will be to make sure all the glue comes out. And this is just more washing of your fabric. If your fabric feels slimy where the glue is, then you still have glue in that area. It should feel like the rest of the wet fabric. It should not feel slimy. So once that glue is out of your fabric, then you're done. Those of you who have wax, you have a little bit more work to do. So I'm going to demonstrate that next. Like I'm actually peeling this glue off. And the areas where my glue was, it's not white. It's light pink. So you'll see that as well, that those areas may not have left a total resist, but most of it has been resisted. Okay, so I'm going to pause our. All right, so those of you who are in the classroom, come on over. Those of you who are online, I'm a little bit farther away from my computer, so I can't really see everything, but I can see comments in the chat. So if you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in. So what I have here is, it's called newsprint. It's the paper that newspapers are made out of, but any type of paper will work for this. If you are working with actual newspaper, just like rub your hand on it first, or a paper towel or something, to make sure that the ink doesn't come off of that paper. We've all seen like the new newspapers that the ink actually rubs off. You want to avoid that. You're going to put like 2 or 3 layers down on an ironing board or a towel. If you don't have paper underneath, the hot wax will seep into whatever is underneath. And then you're going to put 2 or 3 papers on top. Then you're going to iron this. I have my iron set on hot. It's on cotton. Actually, it's on wool, but that's fine too. You can see as I'm ironing, the wax is coming out of my fabric. Once the wax comes out of your fabric significantly, you'll want to put another layer on your piece, because if you don't, this hot wax will get on your iron. So I'm going to take another piece of paper. I'm going to set it on top and iron more. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling that wax out of my fabric. And if I would lift this up, you'd be able to see how much wax I've actually pulled off. And there is some wax on the bottom here too. So what I can do is flip this whole thing over and iron from this side. Because there's less wax coming through. This is just being economical with my paper. Economical, however you say that word. This means that I'm not using tons and tons of paper. This gets the wax out and keeps your fabric soft. It still will have a little bit more stiffness than if you use just glue. You can take fabric, like if you would do this to fabric that you would then make a shirt out of, or pants, or a skirt, you could have that fabric dry cleaned, and the dry cleaners would be able to take the rest of the wax out. So I can feel that there's still wax in here, but for my purposes, this is pretty good. So you can see how much wax I have pulled out of my fabric by just looking at the different sheets of paper. It didn't take me very long. This, because it has wax in it, has to be thrown away and cannot be recycled. But you can now see my design on my fabric. Okay, so that's the last step for those of you who have wax. You need to make sure that any wax or any glue in your fabric is removed so that we can make your book. Okay, you can go ahead and do this step.